Bueno, sí, primero que nada tengo que pedir perdón porque yo voy a hablar en inglés, porque no quiero llenar la cabeza de palabras no oficiales. Y también quiero decir en español que es un placer para mí estar aquí por la noche y con mi buen amigo Nicolás. Cuando las cosas están para pasar, se supone que yo no hubiera estado aquí. I wasn't supposed to be here tonight. Although I was looking forward to introduce Nicolás, I was supposed to fly to New York because I'm supposed to serve on the jury of the American Academy in Rome tomorrow, and a snowstorm canceled my flight. So my wife called me and said, I have bad news. I said, listen, bad news in these times, go ahead and give it to me straight. And she said, the bad news is they canceled your flight. I go, that's great. She goes, what's the good news? He goes, you can introduce Nicolás. I go, fantastic, that's good news and good news. So anyway, Nicolás Quintana, in fact, is a treasure, is our treasure. With a curriculum certainly too large to enumerate tonight. He's a second generation treasure because his father founded the firm, third generation, I'm sorry. His father founded the firm Moenc and Quintana in the 20s in Cuba, and he directed that firm until the 1950s. But Nicolás, who graduated in la Universidad de Havana in 1951, was a prominent figure, not only nationally but internationally, in the formation of modernism, and speaks to Cuba's role in that important development at the mid-century. While tonight we're going to hear from Nicolás on certainly what is his passion, other than his wife, his other passion is the city of Havana. I would just like to say a couple of things about Nicolás that I think are important for us to sort of acknowledge. He certainly rubbed shoulders with the greats that were a generation older than him. He met Picasso in '56 because José Luis Sert, the great Catalan architect, was a very close friend of Nicolás. We know that Sert did the famous regulating plan for La Habana, and Nicolás and Sert were indeed very close. He claims to have been Sert's chauffeur, both in La Habana and in Paris. He also knew Miró, and he was a member at his young age of the CIAM, the Conferencia Internacional para Arquitectura Moderna, which gathered the most important figures at the time, meeting globally and discussing and postulating what the future of modernism would be for the world at that position, roughly at the middle of the last century. Nicolás also was a very good friend of Walter Gropius, the great German architect who came out of the Bauhaus tradition and positioned himself in Harvard and actually changed architectural education and changed the course of American architecture as well. And he speaks very fondly of a time when Gropius was invited to Cuba, and he and a group of colleagues, and I'll mention a little more about this later, invited Gropius, he knows the story I'm about to tell, invited Gropius and showed Gropius their works. I'm sure you're familiar with the works. They're, more than well known, and particularly in the history of Cuban modernism. But Gropius at the time, in the middle of the century, of course, was very orthodox and probably had no idea what he was about to see. And they took him to see these works, and what Gropius saw obviously confused him, because what Gropius saw was the medio punto and the persiana and the Cuban tile patterns somehow strangely and wonderfully married to the intellectual and spatial tenets of Cubism and other traditions of European modernism. And so, according to the story Nicolás has told me, Gropius said, well, I certainly cannot classify this, but I can qualify it. Keep on doing it, it's marvelous. And so those were his words. Now this is important, I believe, because Nicolás and his generation of architects in Cuba were starting to do what the vanguardists were doing a half generation earlier. And that is, they were starting to inculcate this intoxicating marriage of modernism and contextuality that would later be known as postmodernism. Whether they were first or not remains to be seen. And of course, these efforts were truncated, as we know. The fruits of these labors would have been beautiful and can only now be dreamt of. But much work remains to be done in this chapter of scholarship, and hopefully some of us will get to do it. Anyway, tonight, it really is a pleasure to have him here. He is a Renaissance man, he's a gentleman. He has a razor-sharp and a comprehensive intellect, and he has a passion for his craft and a love for Havana, like very few people that I know. I can tell you, for the first time in 48 years, I went back to Cuba 2 weeks ago. I left at age 5, went back 2 weeks ago. I went with the National Trust for Historic Preservation to do the final inspection of the restoration of the Finca Vigía, funded by the National Trust and the Finca Vigía Foundation. And I had, you know, I think Humberto Calzada could probably speak better to this than I ever could, but I had all of the kind of mixed emotions and strange anticipations before getting there. But I expected very much to see it, to see Cuba, you know. And when I got there, I had this kind of strange and haunting feeling that que Cuba no estaba ahí. I couldn't figure out why, you know, pero no estaba ahí. And what I learned is that Cuba, the Cuba we know, or at least the Cuba I know, because it was the one that my parents taught me about, no está en ningún lugar. It's fragmented and it's in many places, but never wholly or solidly in one place. Well, I can tell you for sure, it's going to be here tonight. Enjoy.